Okay, when you picture the fall of Rome, what comes to mind? Probably hordes of so-called barbarians pouring over the walls, right? Burning the city down, ending 1,000 years of civilization. It's this powerful, iconic image. But what if I told you the real story is completely different?
Historian Douglas Boyne just nails it here. He says our image of this event is like a reel of images from a Hollywood disaster movie. And it's true. We've all got this picture in our heads of these wild-haired warriors bringing a whole empire to its knees. It's a story we all think we know.
Because when you really start to look closer at the two most famous sacks of Rome in 410 and 455 CE, the whole story just flips on its head. It becomes this wild tale of broken promises, political assassinations, desperate gambles, and just deep internal decay. The barbarians weren't just at the gates. A lot of the time, they were invited in.
So first, let's just tackle that Hollywood version head-on, this myth of savage outsiders who just wanted to watch the world burn.
The myth is super simple, which is why it's so sticky, right? These unsophisticated tribes, they hate Rome. They show up, and their only goal is to burn it all down. They were the external force that destroyed this great empire. End of story.
But here's the shocker. The actual sources from the time, they tell a totally different story. Groups like the Goths weren't trying to destroy the system. They were desperately trying to join it. They wanted land, they wanted security, they wanted a legal place inside a Roman world that, frankly, they had often been serving for decades. And this right here is the fundamental, tragic conflict. On one side, you have the Goths. They wanted in, but they also wanted to stay who they were. On the other side, you've got Roman imperial policy, which was completely rigid. You surrender totally. We split you up. You assimilate. You lose your identity. As you can see, these two sets of goals were just completely incompatible. It was a disaster waiting to happen. This brings us perfectly to our first case study, the sack of Rome in 410 CE by Alaric the Visigoth. And this wasn't an invasion. Not really. It was the final desperate act in a very long and very frustrating negotiation. First off, we need to get a clear picture of Alaric himself. Forget the image of some wild barbarian from the forest. This guy was a product of the Roman system. He was a skilled general, he'd fought in the Roman army, he understood Roman politics. For all intents and purposes, he was an insider.
And as an insider, oh man, did he have a long list of grievances. For years, he and his people were just used as pawns by feuding Roman leaders. They were promised land, supplies, recognition, only to have those promises broken over and over again. The Roman state was completely two-faced. They even tried to have him killed. Sacking Rome wasn't his plan A. It was more like his plan Z.
And that gets us to the sack itself. It's this moment in history that's been blown up into this myth of absolute epic destruction.
So what did it actually look like? Well, forget the weeks of chaos you might be imagining. Alaric's whole operation lasted only 3 days. In fact, and this is going to sound crazy, many historians call it one of the most restrained and civilized sacks in history. I know, that sounds like a total contradiction, but just listen to this.
Alaric, whose Goths were Christians, gave very clear orders. Holy sites like the basilicas of St. Peter and St. Paul, they were to be respected. Any civilians who took sanctuary there, they were to be protected. The goal wasn't to burn the city. It was to take its portable treasures, the gold and silver they could pay as soldiers. So the crucial point here is this. This was a pressure tactic, not an act of annihilation.
Okay, let's fast forward 45 years to 455 CE. Rome is sacked again, this time by the Vandals. But if Alaric's story was one of desperation, this one is a masterclass in shrewd, calculated opportunism.
Yeah, the Vandals. They literally gave us the word vandalism. So you would expect their sack of Rome to be the absolute definition of wanton destruction, wouldn't you? Well, let's take a look at their leader.
This is Genseric, as described by a historian at the time. This is not some mindless destroyer. He's a cunning political operator, a master strategist, who knows exactly how to exploit his enemy's weaknesses. And in 455, believe me, Rome's biggest weakness was itself.
Just look at the absolute chaos in the months right before the Vandals arrived. The Roman leadership completely implodes. First, the emperor murders his best general. Then, the general's allies murder the emperor. A usurper immediately grabs the throne and, in this insane power move, forces the emperor's widow to marry him. The empire wasn't just weak, it was tearing itself apart at the seams.
And here's the twist.
According to several sources, the widowed Empress Eudoxia, trapped and furious, sends a secret message to Genseric in his kingdom in North Africa, basically inviting him to come attack Rome and free her. So Genseric didn't need to break down the gates. He was handed the key by a member of the imperial family.
When Genseric arrived, the city was defenseless. But once again, this was not a massacre. Pope Leo I met him and negotiated a deal. No burning, no slaughter. In return, the Vandals were given 2 full weeks to systematically strip the city of its treasures, which they did with ruthless efficiency. They even took the gilded roof tiles from the Temple of Jupiter. It was a professional, methodical heist.
So what do we have? 2 very different sects led by 2 very different leaders. But they both point to the same, completely unavoidable conclusion about the true cause of Rome's decline.
Let's just compare them side by side. You've got Alaric, the spurned insider driven by desperation. Then you've got Genseric, the cunning opportunist exploiting a power vacuum. One sack was a 3-day pressure tactic, the other was a 14-day asset-stripping operation. But neither of them was the chaotic bloodbath of legend. And that brings us to the most crucial point of this entire explainer. The sacks of Rome were not the cause of its fall. They were the symptoms of a much deeper sickness that had been festering inside the empire for a very, very long time.
The real culprits weren't the men at the gates. They were the decades of incompetent leadership, the constant civil wars and assassinations, the total inability to integrate new people fairly, and a foreign policy that was just built on a mountain of broken promises. Rome hollowed itself out from the inside.
Which brings us right back to our original question, but now, hopefully with a completely new perspective. Who was truly responsible for the fall of the eternal city?
So, is it the outsider who just takes advantage of the chaos, or the insiders who created that chaos in the first place? I mean, when a structure is rotten to its very core, do you blame the storm that finally knocks it down, or do you blame the rot?